do it overnight. Mental health has been chronically underfunded for a long period of time. We've made a start in this government. We've started to lift the sort of lid on the stigma that has been attached to mental health for too long. We put £400 million into increased talking therapies, £150 million to help teenagers, both boys and girls, by the way, with eating disorders. We've introduced, as of this month, for the first time ever, waiting time standards if you have mental health problems in keeping with the waiting time standards you have for physical health. And we want to go further in the next Parliament. I've already announced a £1.25 billion transformation in the next Parliament for children and adolescent mental health services. And we want to go further, as we have included in our manifesto, a £3.5 billion commitment to finally overcome this terrible injustice and imbalance between mental health and physical. And I'm just so proud, like on so many issues, this transformation would not have started without the kind of courage and pioneering spirit of the Liberal Democrats. Yeah, George.
Thank you. George Parker from the Financial Times. Just a couple of quick questions. It seems fairly unlikely there'll be an EU treaty change in the next Parliament. Under what circumstances would you be prepared to back a referendum on Europe? And the second one is about the balancing of the budget fairly. I think something like 1% of the population already pay about 20% of taxation. Do you think you're actually pushing this a little bit too far and actually start to make society rather unfair for people at the top?
Sorry, say the last bit again.
Do you think...
What, 20%?
I think something like 1% of the population currently pay about 20% of all taxes.
Right.
You have a raft of new policies to increase the tax burden on the rich. Do you actually think that you're starting to push that too far?
OK, look, on the latter point, let's just be clear. First, it's a matter of principle. We're still having to balance the books, right? We need to find £27 billion of additional spending reductions or tax increases to balance the books. And by the way, it's not just an economic necessity. There is actually There's actually a moral element to this. There is nothing remotely fair, which is why I'm so dismayed by the Labour Party's failure to spell out when they're going to balance the books, because there's nothing remotely progressive about shrugging our shoulders and just saying we'll get our kids and our grandkids to carry on paying off the mistakes of this generation. It's like Miriam and myself just kind of say, oh, well, we can't be bothered to pay off this month's credit card bill. We'll just get our kids to do it for us. There's nothing progressive about it. So you've got to do it. So then the question is, how do you do it? Who pays? Who pays? And our answer is, the people who pay to balance the books, it's got to be spread as evenly as possible. And of course that means you start at the top and work down. You don't start at the bottom and work up. And all that the Liberal Democrats are saying, by including £5 billion of tax increases towards that final push of clearing the deficit. By the way, I know the Conservatives won't admit this. We actually increased taxes, £23 billion worth of taxes during the course of this government. Of course, tax plays a role. It plays about a 20% role in terms of the total fiscal consolidation. We're, broadly speaking, sticking to the overall consent, at least amongst economists, the consensus that spending reduction should make up the bulk of fiscal adjustment, 80%, 20% should be made up from taxation. It is the Conservatives who, in an astonishing lurch, quite a sort of dramatic swerve away from what we've done over the last 5 years, want to turn their backs on what we've done over the last 5 years, want to turn their backs on what most mainstream economists say, and instead have singled out one part of the population, the working age poor, to pick up the tab and make additional sacrifices for the mistakes made by bankers. I can't think of anything more sort of dramatically unfair than that. Far from sticking to their Deutsche Autobahn on their posters, they're swerving wildly off onto some sort of ideological track leading to nowhere. So I think what we're doing is simply asking the country, do you want us to finish the job and finish the job fairly and in the way and in keeping with what we've done over the last 5 years? And I don't think, if you look at the detail of the tax increases we have spelt out over the weekend, there's anything remotely punitive about them. There's no increase to headline rates of income tax, VAT, national insurance, or headline rates of corporation tax. On the first point, look, our position on the European referendum has remained the same for years and years and years and years, which is that if a new treaty is put to the British people, it shouldn't be for the British government to decide whether we sign up to it or not. If we pool more sovereignty, decide more things together with other countries in the European Union, that should no longer be the decision. or not even of referendum about whether we stay in or out. Now,
2122.
We 2011 that we would legislate to make sure that this was guaranteed in law from now on, so that no future government could ratify a treaty over the heads of the British people. And we did that, of course, with the Conservatives. You can read stirring speeches. I mean, they are truly moving speeches from William Hague and David Cameron at the time, saying that this was the right approach, that the most irrational approach was to suddenly come up with some random date to have a referendum. And yet, literally within a matter of months, the Conservative Party performed yet another spectacular U-turn on Europe, having first, do you remember, said there was a cast iron guarantee, then having not done that, then having legislated for it, then having contradicted that. Now they say they want a referendum by a certain date, but maybe it isn't that date, that they might want to renegotiate, but they won't tell us whether they'll renegotiate. If they can't renegotiate, will they leave? One day they say they will leave, the next day they say... I just don't know what the Conservative Party will say next Tuesday, let alone in the next Parliament about Europe. Our position remains abundantly clear. Right, more questions? Yep.
While during the coalition government we've had the pupil premium, which has been helping younger people and families, what will you do for education and for families in the next Parliament?
So look, I think the most important thing is, given that there are going to be 400,000 more youngsters going into our nurseries and schools and colleges, we've got to make sure that the money is there to educate them properly. I mean, it's as simple as that. You have more people going into... And that means doing two things. It means, obviously, keeping up with prices, keeping up with inflation in terms of the money you put into the education system, and keeping up with the number of children going into our education system. Now, the Conservative Party have said they'll do one, but not the other. In other words, they'll increase spending in line with pupil numbers, but not with prices. Well, that's a massive cut in real terms for schools and colleges and nurseries. And the Labour Party have said they'll do the other one and not the other. So they'll keep up with prices, but not with pupil numbers. That's another cut. Our plans are to do both. To keep up with prices, to keep up with pupil numbers. That means by the end of the next Parliament, we will spend £5 billion more on our education system than the Conservatives, and £2.5 billion more than the Labour Party. And that, I think, is essential. You know, education is the catalyst. It's the engine of social mobility. If you believe in opportunity, you can't deliver opportunity on the cheap. You've got to invest in education. And shortchanging schools, shortchanging nurseries, cutting money to colleges, which is what the Labour and the Conservative parties imply, is shortchanging the future generation. And Liberal Democrats will not do that. Merlin, yeah. Oh, sorry, you need my mic, apparently.
Thank you, Nick. Oh, I've just got a question. I'm really pleased to see the environment is on the 5 planks. What do you think, compared to the other manifestos of the major parties, are we the only one likely to implement green policies in government?
There seems to be some microphone jinx. Look, as Ed Davey, sitting there in the front row, will tell you, and Chris Hume before him, the thing that we have probably had to spend more time on arguing for in government than almost anything else is simply to ask the Conservatives to stick to their, husky hooding, no, not husky, husky hugging, husky hooding. Well, there's a new concept. Almost as unlikely as compassionate conservatism. Anyway, we simply asked them to stick to their husky-hugging affection for the environment before the last general election. Well, actually, what we discovered the moment we went into coalition with them, just in the same way that when they claimed that they wanted to look after the vulnerable or they wanted to protect civil liberties, they dropped this stuff like a stone. It was just a sort of pale green spray paint job on the Conservative manifesto before the last election to try and appeal to voters interested in the environment. And we've had to fight tooth and nail every step of the way to get them simply to do what they professed they had some interest in last time. Quite revealing, really. And the fact that we've actually, in the teeth of Conservative indifference or opposition, or frankly, if you look at large parts of the Conservative parliamentary party, just downright scepticism in climate change, the fact that we've delivered the world's first green investment bank, a carbon budget, double the amount of electricity provided to us through renewable electricity, and that we want to do so much more through the delivery of these 5 green laws, which we've put on the front page of our manifesto, shows how we stick to our green principles through thick and thin, even if others do not. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very, very much indeed for coming. Thank you.